Hey, everybody, and welcome to Mission Northwest Podcast. We are here to resource and develop churches that connect people to Jesus. I am your host, Wes Henry, and I am here with our executive minister, Corey Laughery, and our special guest today, Mr. Tucker Gunneman. Hey, guys, how's it going?
Good.
It's going great, Wes. Good to be with you. Good to be starting this podcast, episode 2, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It'll be a great time. Corey, would you introduce our guest, and then let's find out a little bit more about him?
Sure. I'd be honored to. Well, today we have Tucker Gunneman with us. Tucker is our brand new part-time director of Interim Ministries for Mission Northwest. So helping churches in their interim time after a pastor resigns, retires, leaves, and between that next pastoral call, there's that interim period, a transitional period. And we thought it was good to focus some of our resources, particularly on having a person who can put energy and time into helping the interim minister and the church in that time. So Tucker's got a wealth of experience, and we wanted to introduce him to the Mission Northwest family and beyond. So Tucker, thank you for being here today. And could you tell us a little bit about your story, your call to ministry? And just take it away, Tucker. We want to learn about you.
Yeah, Corey, thanks for having me. Glad to share with you. My call to ministry really begins with my conversion call, I guess. Conversion experience. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, went to church every Sunday, youth group, went to confirmation. And when I became a teenager, 16, 17, typical kind of rebellion. And as I look back on that, I don't have any firm memory of hearing about the message of salvation in Jesus Christ. I'm sure they taught it, but it didn't, for some reason, it didn't come through. And so hit my teen years, was rebelling. When I was in high school, 17, my dad died suddenly of a heart attack. Mm-hmm. And since then, after that point, for about the next year, I really began to think about death, which seems odd for a 17-year-old. But I was thinking, what does happen to us when we die? Do we just disappear? Do we just, end? And in the meantime, this is a longer story, but in the meantime, my brother had gotten saved. And he was always talking about the glories of heaven. And I was just like, and I thought it was weird. When he told me he got saved, he was high on Jesus. I'm like, oh, good, good grief. But it took about a year, and then my sister got saved. And one night I just knew my life was not going in a good direction, and which my brothers hadn't. That's why he got saved when he was in jail. And I don't think I was heading there, but I knew it wasn't good. And so one night I just prayed. I said, Lord, if you could do for me what you did for my brother and my sister, I want you in my life. And I tell you, not everybody has this experience, but I tell you honestly, I woke up the next morning and the world was different. And I knew I was different. And that's where it began. Bakery that I was working at, I started going to the church that the owners went to. They invited me to work with the youth because they saw the change in my life when I got saved. And this is our youth are struggling. So I kind of started out with that. The youth pastor told me he felt that I had some gifting for youth ministry and should consider the call. Did that, sensed definitely God's call to ministry. So I went from youth to Christian education to associate pastor. Then while I was the associate pastor, I really sensed a call to pastor a church. And my sense of call at that moment was to go to a church and help it get healthy and turn around and do great things for the kingdom. I think that was partly because of my experience in the 2 churches where I served as Christian ed and associate pastor, is they were struggling with those kinds of things, wrestling with how to do that. And so that's where that call came. So let me go back to when I was serving as a Christian ed director and associate pastor. In both those situations, the first one, the pastor resigned, the second one to move to another call, and the second one, the pastor retired. And in both situations, the leadership said, well, we're just going to call an interim who will preach and do pastoral care and kind of take care of us until we call a new pastor, and that pastor will help us figure out what we need to do and figure out where we're going for the future. Well, being on staff, of course, I knew all of the inner workings and all of the struggles and some of the conflict, not church split conflict, but some of the conflicts that existed. And even as a director of Christian Ed with very little ministry experience at that point, my first reaction to that was, that doesn't make sense to me. I had no experience with interim ministry. This is my first time hearing about it. And I'm like, why would they put all of that on a new pastor when he's trying to lead the church? Why don't they fix it now? And then they did it, same thing in the when I was associate pastor. Interestingly enough, the church I was at as a Christian education director, the pastor lasted 3 years. The guy that they called the church where I was the associate pastor lasted less than 2 years. And that just kind of settled my heart in my head that, yeah, it didn't work. That just didn't work. Well, other than that, the whole thought of transitional ministry was out of my brain. I was focused on pastoring a church. First one, I was there for 7 years, and I got to a point where I just felt like I've done all I can. I don't see myself as a 25, 30-year pastor. I just felt that's all I could do. And so I moved to another church. In fact, the first church I went to, when I talked to our area minister, I said, I feel like I'm ready to pastor. And I said, but here's what I want you to know. I want you to send me to a church that needs help, that needs a turnaround, that needs to restructure, reinvent itself, whatever. And he did that. And so the second time around, same thing. And while I was at that church for only 4 years, I began just wrestling with this, 2 years, 3 years in. I said, I kind of feel like I'm done. I got them on the right track. I got them going in the right direction. And I just felt the call to do it again. And at that moment, in those moments, in the back of my mind, I have to laugh because in the back of my mind, I thought, what's wrong with me? All my pastoral colleagues are wanting to stay long-term and most of them were staying long-term. And I always kind of thought there's something wrong with me. So I went to the executive minister and I said, Mike, I just feel this restlessness after 2 or 3 years. Is there a way I could just do interim ministry? So his eyes lit up and he said, yeah, we can always use interims. And that's where that journey began. And the first church I served as a interim was kind of a interesting situation. They were struggling. About half the church wanted to just leave it the way it was. In fact, I think there were some of them that wanted the church to close. And the other half, maybe a smaller percentage of half, really wanted it to do something different, call a new pastor. And my executive minister called me out of that one to go to my second interim because of the need that was there. And that church, unfortunately, ended up closing. It's kind of an ugly story how that happened. But the second call was to a church where the pastor had resigned on Easter. He had been there 10 years. He had more than doubled the attendance of the church. It was a church of about 30 in a small town. It was up to 200. He left under suspicion of having an affair with a part-time youth minister who was a woman, young woman with 2 kids. He had 5 kids. And that summer, it turned out that it was real. People saw evidence that going to her apartment or her house all hours of the night and different things. So the executive minister called me up and he says, Tucker, I want you to go here because I think you could do a good job. And I said, Mike, wait, I have never in my life done anything close to handling clergy misconduct, clergy affair, immorality. I said, why do you think, explain that to me. It didn't make sense. So he just kind of explained what he saw in me. And he said, I really think you're the right person for this. I'm like, okay, I'm going to trust your judgment. I won't go into all the details of that. The situation became much, much worse. And if anybody wants to hear that story, I'd be glad to tell them at some point. But the church healed and got back on track. A year later, called their new pastor. And within a year, 2 years, they were back going gangbusters. And I credit it a lot to the congregation because they are absolutely, from the influence of the former pastor, they are absolutely determined that they were going to turn this thing around and get back to what the new pastor was doing, because he was an evangelist. I mean, he almost personally grew that church through evangelism and then trained them to be evangelists. So anyway, during this time, something else was going on. I went to Mike and I said, our executive minister, and I said, Mike, I'm just kind of feeling like I could maybe offer something else, or I'd like to do more, maybe work with more than one church at a time. And at that point, he said to me, he said, well, that's interesting. You should say that, because we're moving away from area ministry to consultants. He said, how about I make you the consultant for transitioning ministries, and you oversee our whole, kind of like what I'm doing here, but in Michigan, it was included working with the search teams. And so I did that for 9 years. So while I was doing that, we had pastors that wanted to be church planters. And I would, because it was a kind of a transitional type of thing, the executive minister had me go with them to a church planters assessment. And while I was there, one of the things that they do with the church planters is they do assessments of different kinds of psychological things, but one of them was strength finders. And I found not a lot of people are familiar with that anymore, but back in the 2000s, it was very popular.
Yeah, it was really big.
So I took the test. I thought, that sounds interesting. So I read the book, did the assessment, and I was sitting at a table with all of the assessors, and a guy next to me who did coaching for strength finders. He looked at me and he said, well, what are your strengths? So I told him. He says, I bet you just thrive doing interim ministry and helping churches get better. And I looked at him dumbfounded, and I go, how did you know that? He says, by the list of strengths that you gave me. And I reflected back to, as I shared earlier, what's wrong with me that I don't want to be a long-term pastor? It's like an epiphany. The light went on, and I'm like, I get it now. God made me that way. And It was obvious in those strengths that that's how he had formed me to do this kind of work. And so
how many interim ministry assignments did you end up doing for Michigan, and then how many did you end up overseeing when you were leading transitional ministries there? And then we want to talk about what we're envisioning for Mission Northwest. So, okay. Yeah.
I did 10 in Michigan and retired, moved to Washington to be closer to our grandkids, and then long story, but Patty made a connection with Mission Northwest. Patty called me and said, I have a church for you. So I came out of retirement, finished that one, and was ready to finish again. And she says, I have another one for you. And I just said, well, I would really like to retire, but if that's where God needs me, that's what I'll do. And that's kind of been my heart all along, is, always that pull to get away and retire and do what I want to do. And so once again, I finished that interim, the second one here in Michigan last May. And
that was in Washington, right? Was that Puyallup? Yeah.
The first one was in Bremerton at Manette Community Church, and then First Baptist Puyallup. And now I'm the director of Interim Ministries for Mission Northwest. Cool. So I'm ready to retire. Yeah.
Well, so you bring a wealth of experience. Thank you for sharing some of that background for us, and that you've been in different situations, and now across our vast region, and we have different churches open in between their pastors. And why is it, from your experience and your study, why is it so important? You talked about change. You initially didn't think that they had to always wait for to work on some of those changes. But flesh out for us, why, as churches are listening to this, why is this interim ministry time so important? And what are some things that Mission Northwest can help the church and help the interim minister do?
A lot of that grew out of my relationships with other pastors and listening to them struggle, and sometimes even saying, man, I wish they'd fixed this before I got here, because, I probably won't stay long because of what it took, energy, trust for me to fix this. And so just listening and watching and seeing so many churches struggling, just absolutely struggling with the changes, the quick pace of change that was happening in our culture. And I also saw our region and our churches go through this program, this assessment, that assessment, to help figure that out. And I began to realize at that moment that it's not, assessments are good, and those kinds of things, but it really takes a person that can come in and quickly relate to the people in the church, quickly build trust. A lot of that's built because of the reason I'm there, but do that and then just take a good, honest, hard look, hard, maybe difficult's a better word, challenging look at who they are, what's been blocking them from being more effective for the kingdom, and how can we get those things put in place to empower the new pastor to have the best ministry that they could have while they're in that church. Again, I go back to those 2 calls at the churches where I was an associate. The new pastor, part of it was not a good fit with the one, but both of them, it was they were trying to fix things that were broken, and not broken because of the previous pastor, broken because of the culture of the church and the way they'd been operating, and try to overcome those barriers. I also saw a lot of resistance in leadership to making changes. And I thought they need somebody that can come in that does not have the fear of being let go. And I say this carefully, not have the fear of being let go because they are taking on some big challenges and bringing out into the open some reality of why they are where they're at and why they are not able to move forward. And I think it was the best way I can answer that is I think it's just something God put on my heart, that's the time, that's the crucial time for a church to say, hey, we've been struggling, and whether it's a struggle or whether it's in some cases a long-term pastorate, how do we get past this long-term pastorate? And we love the guy and he was just wonderful, and now he's retired, and the uncertainty of what's coming. I saw as an associate the uncertainty of what was going to be coming down the road. Just needed a voice to help them grieve that, help them feel at peace and be at ease, but also someone who would give them a sense of hope for the future and say, if you do the things that God has laid out for you to do, there's nothing that can stop you. My verse that I quoted in almost every church was Ephesians 3:20 and 21. And now that I've said that, I've got to quote it. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond all that we can ask or imagine, to him be the glory in Christ and to the church in Christ Jesus forevermore, something that like to that effect. I grabbed onto that and I said, that's the truth that our churches need to hear, that they're struggling, they're down, they're discouraged. You don't need to be discouraged if you follow the plan that God has. And that plan is basically fulfilling the mission of Christ in your context, in your culture.
Amen. So with that in mind, that we can do immeasurably more than we can even think or ask or imagine, what would you want church leaders in the interim period to know? Like, one thing I've tried to encourage them, it could be a time of growth, maybe not, I don't know, a huge numerical growth, but growth in leadership, growth in mindset. But what are there things that you would encourage church leaders about that interim time period as you try to help them have hope?
I did that mostly through my preaching, but then also meeting with the leadership.
I'm thinking specifically like you on the phone with church leaders now, and they're saying, gosh, Tucker, it's, we had Pastor so-and-so for 25 years. We just don't know this interim period, is what's going to happen. They have uncertainty. What might you say to encourage them to consider a healthy interim time?
Okay.
Great question.
I would share with them that if they are willing to take an honest look at who they are and take an honest look at things that could be barriers for them to grow, to reach to have an impact on the community for the mission of Christ, that anything is possible, but it's going to require them to just to be honest and swallow hard some big pills, but that if they do that and say, okay, let's move forward. And the churches that I served as a transitional pastor who said, yes, let's do that, they are doing well. Unfortunately, there were many churches that just wouldn't do it. And I, I'm saddened to say that as I look back in Michigan, there are a few of the churches I served as a transitional pastor that have closed. They called
Mm.
pastors after I was there, sometimes a couple. They just couldn't get their heads around making the mission of Christ a priority. They wanted tradition, the past, reinventing the past
Yeah.
instead of being willing to reinvent themselves. And the other thing that I would say is as I understand, that is a scary thing for some people to set
Hmm.
aside the back and set aside the past and go into a future that you can't see. But
Hmm.
again, that if you go into it with eyes wide open and going into it with the strength that God gives, the Holy Spirit, and following His path, in my opinion, there's nothing that can stop you. Nothing
Mm.
at all
Yeah.
will stop you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Tucker, I heard you mention the word grief or grieve in a transition. And to be honest, I've been through a couple of different churches where, the minister was there long term, and then someone just jumped right in, and everybody wondered why they struggled. Can you tell me why it's important to maybe lead a congregation or lead a group through the grief so that they can be ready for the new and be ready for what God wants to do? How important is that piece?
Well, when the former pastor was really well liked, well loved, and had a good ministry, the
Yeah.
mindset, the natural, I think the human mindset is we need to get somebody like him because
Mm.
things
Right.
were going
Okay.
so well when he was the pastor.
Yeah.
On the flip side, and I'm not saying that a retired pastor has not had a good ministry, but they've had a good ministry. But maybe the church is even feeling, the leadership is feeling, we kind of need something new. And honestly, I've had conversations with long-term retired pastors that when they
Yeah.
retired, they said, the church needs me. I'm ready to retire, but the church needs me to retire because they need to hear a new voice. So
Yeah.
I've
Mm.
heard
So
both of
good.
those. But the grieving process is to time to say, we're sad that he's gone. We celebrate his ministry. Um, but now we need to take a look at the future. And I think part of the transitional interim's role and the part of the role of transition, purpose of the transition time is really to draw people out and have those conversations about what they loved about the former pastor, but what their
Hmm.
dreams are for the future. And in those conversations, a lot of it is about conversations. And in those conversations, I think things are brought out that people probably thought of but never verbalized. And when they verbalize, they go, "Oh, I do feel that way." That yes, it was a great ministry and things were going well, but maybe we do need something different. Maybe there is another
Mm.
way, maybe a fresh voice. Most
Yeah.
churches, when it's a long-term pastorate and he retires, they go, "Oh, we need to get a young person in here." And it's oftentimes the young pastor's first church or second church, and they do things very, very differently
Oh yeah. Oh
from
yeah.
the previous pastor. So that brings me to the other point, the value of the transitional period is it gives the
Right.
church a chance to get used to somebody new for the short term before they
Hmm.
get into the experience of getting used to somebody new for the long term. It kind of gives them an adjustment period. As pastors, we all deal with people when they've particular spouses, they lost a spouse, and the rule of thumb is don't make any major decisions for the first year. Take
Right.
that time to grieve. I think the
Hmm.
same thing is true for a church in transition after long-term pastorate or a well-loved pastorate, even if it was short-term, 7 to 8, 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
Take that time to grieve and to rethink your life and to rethink what are we going to do now. And I will tell you that in the churches that asked that question, what are we going to do now, didn't do well in the future. The churches
Hmm.
that said, what does God want us to do now? Those are
Mm.
the churches
Hmm.
that thrived in
Hmm.
the future. And
Yeah,
some
Come
people say,
on.
well, there's not that big of a distinction, but to me it is. And I think that's what
it
the
is.
role of transitional pastor,
Yeah.
transitional
Yeah.
time is to get them to focus on, okay, what is God saying? God has brought you to this point of change. What is he saying to you in these moments? about where he wants you to go in the future.
Yeah, having discernment about what God's
That's one
calling
of
you to.
those.
I think that's
That's one of
critical.
those moments, man. Like, say it again for the people at the back who didn't hear it.
Yeah. What does
Yeah,
God have for us to do?
those who ask,
Amen.
yes, that part. I
Yes.
love that. I love that.
Tucker, let me ask you. So, we're part of your job is also looking for candidates that can be interim ministers, transitional pastors, and so there might be some folks out there listening who are thinking about doing that, or they're in ministry like you were, and they're hearing your story, going, "Huh, that's a little bit like me." So what are we looking for? What are you looking for in an interim minister? And what would you say to someone who may be considering it? And is it only for retired folks?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take it away. Yeah.
All right.
Nice.
Well, first of all, if they say, "Hey, that sounds a little bit like me," I really want to talk to them, because here's the reason why. What that is saying to me is God has put it on their heart to do this.
Yeah.
I've had people say, "Well, I'm between churches, I'll serve as an interim," but their heart really wasn't in an interim. I've had people come to me, this is in Michigan, they'd come to me and say, "Well, I kind of left my church, I'm not sure what I want to do, so interim sounds good, but if I get a call, can I leave?" And I'm like, no, I'm looking for people, in the application I had the word call, who feel called. And I think the call to transitional ministry maybe only be for a few people, small percentage. Others just say, "Hey, that sounds interesting." And some may say, "Well, that's still a call." A call to transitional ministry for me is what I did. That this is going to be my ministry starting as a young man of 40 or 45, whenever I started it. And that's going to be my career. Pastors that are in retirement that say, "Hey, that sounds like me," are probably reflecting on how God has used them to turn a church around, to help a church get healthy, and say, "I'm retired. I don't want to do this full time, but I miss ministry, and I miss the opportunity to have an impact on a church and on people for the kingdom. And I think I'd like to get back into that." The other thing I would be looking for, as I kind of mentioned, is are people who have had the experience, successful experience of helping a church turn around, face those challenges. And I was encouraged by a colleague when I said that have had those experiences of being effective. They said, "Well, some churches, some pastors have tried that and not been effective, but it wasn't because of them, it's because of the church." And I get that. But their heart is to see a church turn around and get healthy and move forward. And I've had actually a couple of people that were not pastors, but had been in ministry. They've been associate pastor, they've been youth pastor, worship pastor, and they retired and wanted to still do ministry. And when I talked to them, they shared with me that in their experience, they were involved in the leadership and with the pastor and going through those procedures and those processes of reinventing the church, developing a new mission statement, creating a new vision for the future. So somebody who's had experience around that. When a pastor comes to me, or a candidate has come to me, and basically their main role as a pastor has been a chaplain, which is a powerful ministry, unless that experience was in dealing with conflict or helping a church get healthy, we're not looking for chaplains. We're looking for people who will be strong enough in themselves and strong enough in what God has called them to do to have some honest conversations with the church. And I'll just give you a quick example. I'm not speaking out of turn. First Baptist Puyallup, when I went there, I was a little reluctant. I really wanted to be done. And so I told Patty, I said, "Well, I will meet with the council and I will tell them exactly who I am and what I do and how I do it. And if they want me, I'll do it. I'll go." And so I just laid out to them. I said, "I'm going to tell you, I will be completely honest with you. If I see something, hear something, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm going to put it on the table. But I promise you, I will be nice. They'll be filled with grace." And they said, "Okay." And I tell you what, I laid something out to them. They said, "Okay, let's do that." Laid something out. Okay. Laid something out. Yep, you're right. That's where we're at. That's where we've been. We need to go somewhere different. And that's the kind of transitional pastor that can, in fact, a council member said to me, he says, "You're exactly what we need." right now. We need a pastor who's going to be collaborative and work with us. And that again, I'm still learning from what people say, what characteristics of a transitional pastor work, and being collaborative is one of them.
Yeah.
It's not going
and
you go here, you go there, this is what you're going to do. No, you're wrong. No, it's a collaboration of conversation, but being able to be honest and put it on the table. And so for church leadership that's listening to this, they need to be ready to have somebody with fresh eyes, say to them, do you realize that when you say this or when you're doing this, this is what's happening and this is why it's hurting you moving forward?
Yeah. Those fresh eyes, fresh ears, like coming in from the outside and saying, hey, do you know what your worship service feels like? Or do you know that people who are visiting don't understand what you're saying when you do this? Or you're not welcoming anybody? Or do you know what your entryway even really looks like? You know, you've been here so long. Those fresh eyes, fresh ears, so important. I just think I'm repping Blackfoot Christian Fellowship today, and they had an interim pastor years ago, Dick Sipe, that, you know, the church was really small, but he did the hard work, and got them to be ready to embrace change. And now their pastor, Kevin Oliveris, is just, God is blessing that ministry and lots of good things happening there. So there's examples of that throughout our region of interim ministers who go in there, speak the truth, like you're saying, and have some fresh eyes. But it takes the local leaders saying, okay, yeah, what are we ready to get ready for this next phase of what God is calling us to? So I just think it's so important. I guess there isn't a question there. I'm just kind of riffing off what you said, Tucker.
Let me also just say that when a transitional pastor goes to a church and they hear people in the church saying, well, why can't we just keep you as a pastor? That's a sign of doing a good job.
But it's important that usually, I mean, the situation is, there are exceptions, but the situation is that the transitional or interim pastor agrees not to stay, right? That's the usual.
They have to understand that they don't know. My saying that was easy because, you know, being 45, 50, I still had years of ministry and it would make sense for me to do that. But I would just have to say, no, my calling is this. My calling is this. But having said that, I will say that there was one church that I did go back to, and after being their interim, and which was not our normal practice, but the executive minister agreed that he felt that it was a good fit, and it was a church. It was a downtown church, dilapidated building. They moved into, they sold the building, moved into a neighborhood in a little tiny church. I said, this is temporary while we're waiting for God to show us where we want to go. And when I was there as the interim and helping them adapt and make some changes and take a look at that, they said, you're what we need. We need a visionary leader. And I said, but I can't do this. So I told them, I said, you do a search. I'm going to resign. You do a search. And if you still can't find anybody, we'll talk about it. I went back and we ended up, it basically was a restart, kind of a church restart / church plant with about 40, 45 people. And most church planters last about 4 or 5 years. I lasted 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Typical to my style. Got them.
So you were just helping them through the next transition, really. I mean,
it became the next transition. Bought an old grocery store, remodeled it in a new part of town that was very unreached, and the church is doing good.
Cool. Let me. We only have a couple minutes. Only have a couple minutes left, and so I want to just buckle in on some nuts and bolts, Tucker, if we could, with the time we have remaining. So a church may be thinking, pastor resigned, and well, if we don't have an interim, we don't have to pay a pastor, right? So it's a time where you can potentially save some money for the future. But talking nuts and bolts with church leadership, what are some things you say about the cost of an interim pastor, what an interim pastor needs, how many weeks a month do they work, what are the expectations, and is it different for different churches? So can you talk nuts and bolts real quick? I know it'd be a much longer conversation if you're actually having it with the church leader, but can you give us the basics?
Sure. One of the things that grieved me when I've heard churches say that, well, we're going to call in interims to save money. And I thought, no, this is a time to invest in the future
Mm.
of the church. It's not a time to
Yeah,
save money.
that's
It's
so
not a
good.
time to stay the status quo. It's not a time to just sit back and wait. It's a time, as I said before, to take that honest look at yourself and invest in your future with a transitional pastor who will help you see the future, see what the possibilities are, but also help you remove any roadblocks. I like the concept of removing roadblocks rather than necessarily fixing things, but because I think that's what most of it is. And I just think it's a time
Good verbiage.
to invest in their future. Does that
So
answer your
nuts and
question?
bolts, so beyond the vision. I get your vision. You've been clear on that, but what do you talk to them about, just so they can know, what is is there a typical interim pastor expectation of what a church needs to provide, or does it
Sure,
depend on where the church is, or so forth?
I got you. Well, definitely Sundays, and uh, I recommend a total of 3 to 4 days a week, including Sunday. So Sunday and 2 to 3 days during the week. If the need is there, full time, but usually a transitional pastor can do this in 2 to 3 days a week. The other thing to think about is because the transitional pastor is not doing full pastoral duties, and he is
Hmm.
focusing on helping the church get ready for the next pastor, that other responsibilities of a called pastor, like pastoral care, hospital visitation, shut-ins, that should be divided up among or given to people in the congregation who have gifts in that. And
Mm.
I say that partly because I don't have, that's not one of my gifts. That's not one of my strong points. It was always difficult for me to do that because I was always wanted to spend my time focusing on the other things. So if a church can uh, provide pastoral care through its members, obviously in a life-death situation, the person's going to want the pastor. So there's a little exception to that. But really to see the pastor spending that time really focusing on fixing it, overcoming barriers, looking to the future. The other factor is because and I always used to use this phrase: the church that the interim is serving is rarely in their backyard. The transitional pastor has to be willing to be gone away from home for a period of time, and the church then needs to be able to provide housing for them.
Housing, yeah, and
Uh,
that may be a parsonage, that may be a housing, uh, an apartment that somebody in the church owns, or have you seen different solutions? I'm guessing.
Yeah, just talked to one of our interims, and they have an apartment. They have a one-bedroom apartment for he and his wife. They're doing the ministry together, which I think is great. I think that's really a powerful setup. And then what I would always ask for is mileage for a 1 week for the trip there and back. Not like if I chose to go home and then come back one day, it'd just be a weekly round trip mileage from my home to the church.
So
And
they're going to
then
have some costs like that,
there's,
but probably not full, like healthcare or Social
yeah, no
Security
health
offset or
care,
retirement,
no
because
retirement,
a
no
lot.
health care.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and really we encourage them to set aside those dollars for the search process, for
mm,
bringing in candidates, and then bringing in candidates to interview and to see the area, and then bringing in the final candidate for a weekend hotel, travel expenses, and then when called, moving expenses. So they shouldn't reduce their budget, keep the budget the same. So the pastor receives whatever percentage of the previous pastor's compensation was for, like, if they're 4 days, it'd be 80%, that type of thing. You do the math.
yeah,
Um, and
prorated
then,
amount.
yeah, and the prorate amount, and then the health care and retirement are set aside for the search and the call for a new pastor. But the transition pastor should also retain reimbursement items in the budget
Yeah, definitely,
for
definitely.
pastor,
Well,
pastor calling, books,
yeah.
periodicals. They should send their transitional pastor to conferences. Absolutely. Give them time
Hmm.
for training. Uh, Definitely give them time off for vacation
So,
because
right.
this can be an intense ministry, as
Hmm.
pastoral ministry is, but kind of in a different way. And so that 1 week per month, or sorry, 1 week per quarter is, I think, I found really helpful, really important to have.
And church leaders who are watching this should know Tucker will work all those details out with your local church, and some things will be specific to what your situation is and needs, and an agreement is reached, and he does a good job at that. And Tucker, just to wrap up our conversation, where's the best way they can connect with you? I think you've got an email address, and
email is simply tucker@missionnw.org. Did I get that right?
Tucker@missionnw.org. And you can always contact the Mission Northwest office. You can always contact me too. But Tucker's an easy guy to talk to and knows his stuff and is very experienced. And we're privileged to have you on the Mission Northwest staff for as long as we can have you. If you decide to retire again, we might just give you another job. So, but
appreciate that. No, I'd love to hear from churches. Love to hear from pastors. Retired pastors who would like to do this kind of ministry, and even church leadership. And you and I, Corey, have talked about this, that they hear their pastor is going to be moving on or retiring. They'll contact you first, but even before the pastor is gone, would love to have the conversations with them.
Yes, absolutely. Reduce
kind of the sooner you get on this, the better. But I also believe in maybe a month or two of pulpit supply, just to get our ducks in a row. We usually need that kind of time to get our ducks in a row for the finding a transitional pastor.
The sooner we know, the better, as far as looking for candidates and doing some prep work. And pastors, if we'll keep news confidential and stuff, but we can help coach you in how to best transition. So some of that is part of what we provide as a service as well. So, wow, we've had a lot of good content here today on Interim Ministries and getting to introduce Tucker. So thank you, Tucker. And I just want to say, when I was 26 years old, I was an interim minister. So there's young folks out there that can do it. It was my only interim ministry assignment. Did it for 9 months at Central Baptist Church in Spokane. And they taught me a lot of things, and it was a good time. And so it's such an important ministry. So Tucker, thank you for your time today. And I think Wes will probably close us out.
Yeah. Tucker, thanks for your time, man. I greatly appreciate it. And there's a lot more where this came from. And so if you are viewing this on YouTube, please make sure that you like and subscribe, share all of this with all of the folks that you know. Give us a thumbs up out there. If you are on any of the podcasts and you're just listening to us, thanks for being with us. Again, we are Mission Northwest. We are here to develop and resource churches that connect people to Jesus. And this is just one of so many resources we are trying to gather together and put together so that we can grow the kingdom here in the Pacific Northwest. Hey, Corey, thanks for this time. I greatly appreciate being a part of this. Tucker, thanks again for hanging with us. And you guys have a great time. We will see you in the next episode.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. See ya.